Hi everyone, welcome to week 3. We are going to be moving on to chapter 3 and we're going to be talking about an intro to law. So this chapter really is going to focus on the different elements of criminal law. So we kind of just go over what are some of the basic concepts of criminal law this week. So the first lecture is going to really talk about some terminology that you need to understand for criminal law. The second lecture is going to talk about the elements of criminal law. And the third PowerPoint will talk about criminal defenses. So that will be what we talk about this week. So the first thing I want to do is share my PowerPoint with you. And we will start giving some of the terminology that you'll need to know for criminal law. Okay, so chapter 3 is basically, an introduction to criminal law. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I want to do is just to get you thinking about criminal law. I think it's kind of funny. These are some crazy criminal laws that have existed throughout history. So what happens a lot of times is you have people pass laws and they never get taken off the books. So you end up with these sometimes crazy laws throughout history that still exist, probably not enforced, but still exist. So I thought it's just interesting. You can kind of read through it and see what some of them are. I think they're kind of funny. But let's get started. So let's start from the beginning. When you're talking about criminal law, the first thing you want to do is define the concept of law. So what is law? So a law are rules created by the government and enforced by the government to regulate and protect society by regulating behavior. So they're rules passed by the government to control and regulate how people behave. That is what a law is. Now, it's important to remember it's created by the government and it's also enforced by the government. So the government has the ability to enforce these laws. Okay? So the next question is, why do we have laws? Why do we even bother having laws? Well, there are many different purposes for laws. First, we have laws to protect and punish people. We want to regulate their behavior, so we have the ability to protect them and punish them with these laws. And then we also have laws for the purpose of maintaining certain standards that we want. So we want certain moral standards for our country. So we have certain morality crimes, and also to teach what the social bounds are. What are we allowed to do and not do? So that would be the purpose of law. Okay. So the question is, why do people follow the laws? And this is based on the idea of rule of law. Rule of law is the idea that in an orderly society, everybody has to follow the laws so that we have peace and order in our society. If everybody violated the laws at once, there really would be no way to actually enforce it. But we all choose to follow the laws because we don't want to die every day, basically. We're willing to follow the laws so that we maintain some sort of order and peace in our everyday life. So we all as a society agree to work together and follow the laws. Oops, I stopped sharing. I apologize. I don't know what I was doing. Clicked the wrong thing. Okay, try again. Now, another concept we have is what's called jurisprudence. Jurisprudence is the study of law. So a lot of times you hear the term ology, psychology, sociology. It's the study of. And for law, we call it jurisprudence. So jurisprudence is the study of the law. We study law, and we call it jurisprudence. So how the laws are written, how they're enforced, what they mean, how they're put together. That's all part of the study of jurisprudence. Okay, so where do we find these laws? So when we say we have a law, where do we look for it? So like if I say, where do you find a definition? You'd say Google or Wikipedia or dictionary, right? So those are what we call sources. So the question is then, what are the sources for law? If you needed to find a particular law, where would you look? What would the source be for that law? Now we have multiple sources, 4 main sources of law, okay? So we have constitutional law, we have common law, we have statutory law, and we have administrative law. And you need to know what each of them are. So the first one is constitutional law. Constitutional law is just the rules or regulations or laws that were created in our Constitution. So there's the US Constitution that created our government and then limited that government in the Bill of Rights. And those things are what we consider constitutional law. Constitutional law is the supreme law of the land. It controls everything. Nothing we have is allowed to violate constitutional law. We can't pass new laws that violate constitutional law. Everything has to abide by the Constitution. The next source of law is what we would call common law. Common laws are the laws written by the court system. So judges can make decisions in court cases, and those decisions become law. So if it comes from a court and a judge, that is called common law. Some of our laws come from statutes, which is from Congress, okay? So we have a Congress, that's the Senate and the House of Representatives. They pass laws, and those are what we call statutory laws. All of the crimes in criminal law are statutory law. So whenever we want to make something a criminal behavior for which somebody can be punished, it has to come from our legislative branch, and it's statutory law. And then the last one is what we call administrative law. Administrative laws are laws that come from governmental agencies. So we have the IRS, the FBI, the CIA. They can make their own rules and regulations within their agencies that people have to follow. So if it comes from those administrative agencies, governmental agencies, that's considered administrative law. Regulations are administrative laws. So hopefully you understand each of those four sources, okay? So, I guess I spoke faster than my finger. So remember, constitutional laws are laws expressed within the Constitution. And we have state constitutions and federal. I was mostly referring to federal. Federal Constitution is the supreme law of the land based on what we call supremacy clause within the Constitution, which declared that the Constitution is the main law of the land. But every individual state also has a constitution. And as I said, common law is sometimes referred as case law. Those words are interchangeable. Common law, case law, those are judge-made laws, okay? So they come from judges. Basically, common law is we rely on this idea of precedent and stare decisis. A precedent is a prior court case, okay? So if a group of judges in 2010 decided something, that a case should be a certain way, that is a precedent. So the prior actual decision is the precedent. We in this country use this idea of stare decisis. That's the idea that judges must look back at precedent to help them decide what the current law is. So judges can't willy-nilly off the top of their head make decisions. They have to look at precedent and rely on precedent to make current or new decisions. So mostly common law is going to be civil law. So you don't see any crimes, no crimes are common law because all our crimes have to be statutory law, okay? So the last one is statutory law. Like I said, it is laws created by the legislative branches. So there's a federal legislative branch, which is Congress and the Senate. Which is the House of Representatives and the Senate make up Congress. In our state, we have the Assembly and the Senate. Sometimes there may be local legislative, county legislative branches. If those pass laws, those are called statutes. And all crimes, every criminal law has to be statutory crime laws, come from the legislative branch. And then we said the last thing is administrative law, which are those rules and regulations that come from administrative agencies. Usually it should be detailed, not detained, very detailed rules, very specific rules. So if you see something really picky, like a lobster must be 12.2 inches long, then that would be a regulation. It's very, very detailed, okay? So look through these and decide which category you think that they would be. So read through them, do A, B, C, D, stop the video, and then when you're set, start the video again, and I'll give you the answers. So these are your answers. How'd you do? Did you get it right? If you have any questions over any of these, please send me an email. I'll be happy to explain anything to you. Okay? So another thing that I want to talk about are the classification of laws. So every law can be broken down into 3 different categories, and all laws fall into one of each of the things in each category. So the first thing is state or federal. So a law is either a state law or a federal law. It cannot be both. So if it's written by a federal court or a federal Congress or a federal agency, then it's federal law. If it's written by a state judge, a state legislative branch, a state agency, then it's state law. Okay, so it's either state or federal. It cannot be both. Now, when you're talking about criminal law, 90% of criminal law is state law. So all of the basic crimes that you think of, rape, murder, burglary, arson, all of those things are all going to be state law. It's not going to be federal law unless it involves multiple states or something that can cross borders. So anything with the internet or the mail or the phone service or kidnapping across state lines, all of those are going to be federal. Otherwise, they're going to be state. The next category is criminal or civil. So all laws are either going to be criminal laws or they are going to be civil laws, okay? So civil laws are always resolving a dispute between 2 citizens, and usually the punishment is money, where criminal law is the government going after an individual for violating the law, and the punishment is usually a fine or jail time or something like that. So criminal is the government versus the person for violating social order, and civil is usually 2 entities, private entities, going against each other. The last one is what we call procedural or substantive. So substantive laws are all the laws that every single person in the country has to follow. You cannot murder, you cannot rape, you cannot steal, you cannot burglarize, you can't take a car. So those are all substantive laws. They're laws that everybody in the whole country has to follow. But we also have what are called procedural laws. Procedural laws are the laws that set down certain procedures that must be followed by people that work in the legal system, okay? So procedural criminal law, you must have a warrant before you can arrest. You must read Miranda before you interrogate. Those are certain procedures that have to be followed within the law. So not everybody has to follow procedural law. It's people that work in the system have to follow procedural law. And then substantive laws are the laws that everybody in the whole world has to follow. Now remember, laws fall into one of each of these categories. So you could have a state civil substantive law. You could have a federal criminal procedural law. You could have a state criminal procedural law. So it's just one in each category. It cannot be more than one thing in each category. So was the law created by state legislature or federal? That's how we determine if it's state or federal, like I just said. My mouth is slow, okay? Now let's check our knowledge. First, we'll talk about state or federal. So read through the list and decide if you think each of these would be state law or federal law. So stop the video, work through each of these, identify them state or federal, and then when you're ready, click to the next slide and see if you got them right. So that's the first 3. So federal, state, federal. Here are the other ones. Federal, federal, state, state. Okay? So hopefully, sorry, I went so fast. So hopefully you can check your answers and see if you got them right. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out and I'll be happy to help. So remember, I said civil are a dispute between individuals. Criminal is the state versus defendant. So I made this nice little list to show you some of the differences. So most laws are civil except for criminal law. So wills and trusts and all those things, those are going to fall under civil law. If it's the society trying to protect people from harm, that's criminal. I said disputes between individuals is civil, state is state versus defendant, criminal. You have what we call plaintiff versus defendant. In civil, that's the names of the parties. In criminal, it's the state versus the defendant. If you are found responsible under civil law, we say you're liable. If you're guilty of if you committed a crime, you're found guilty. The amount of evidence that has to be presented at trial differs. If it's civil, it's preponderance of evidence. In order to find somebody guilty of a crime, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. And in civil, I said you win money. Criminal, it's a punishment. Okay, so let's just check your knowledge on that now. So you read each of these and you decide if they would be civil or criminal. So stop the video, see how you're doing, and then when you're all ready, you can start the video again, and we'll see if you got it right. Okay, so this is the first 4. So civil, criminal, civil, civil. Here's the rest. Criminal, civil and criminal, because if you're on the red light, it's criminal. If you injure somebody and they sue you, it's civil. And then the last one is civil. Okay, so if you have any questions, again, reach out and I'll be happy to answer any questions. So remember, the last category is substantive versus procedural. So remember, substantive are actual laws that state what you can and cannot do. Cannot murder, cannot rape, that's all the penal law. Procedural laws are the rules that govern people who work in the system. So Miranda warnings, speedy trial, warrants, those are all procedural. So let's check your knowledge on this one. So read each of them and decide if you think they would be substantive or procedural, okay? So read them, write what you think, and then when you're all ready, click to the next slide. Okay, so the first one's substantive, then procedural, then substantive. Okay, any questions on any of that? Shoot me an email. Okay, so one of the other concepts I want to talk about this week is the difference between what we call mala in se laws and mala prohibita laws. So in old times, this was one of the things we used to distinguish between the types of laws, okay? So laws that we considered inherently evil and wrong always throughout history are what we call mala in se laws. They are inherently wrong, always wrong laws. So murder, rape, assault, those kind of things. Those are always mala in se crimes. They are the worst of the worst crimes, always considered wrong. Mala prohibita are more likely to be crimes that are declared wrong because society thinks they're wrong right now. So they're more based on time and where we are right now. They're not always considered wrong. It's just something society has declared wrong in more recent times. So this was the way that ancient law discriminated or distinguished between the types of laws. So mala in se and mala prohibita. Okay, so here's another check for you. So decide which each of these would be mala in se. It should say A, mala in se, or B, mala prohibita. Okay. So make sure, see if you got them right. Get them right? If you have any questions, just reach out. Like I said, like murder and rape, those are all always bad. But bigamy is being married to more than one person at the same time. Gambling, pornography, those have been more recent society that we think they're bad. Okay. Now, we don't use that distinction anymore. We don't use mala and se, mala prohibita. You may see it sometimes out when you're reading, so you need to know that terminology. But what we use in current times is the idea of felonies and misdemeanors. So felonies are crimes for which are the most serious crimes for which you may have a punishment of over 1 year in prison. So felonies are our worst. And then we have misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are less serious crimes for which you could get up to 1 year in jail. And then offenses or violations are 15 days or less in jail. They're just more minor types of things, speeding tickets and things like that. So instead of using mala pro se, mala inhibita, those things, we use felonies and misdemeanors to distinguish between the levels of crime in current society. Okay, so you read each of these and match. Do you think this would be a felony, a misdemeanor, or a violation? So stop the video, see if you can match it, and then start the video when you're ready to roll. So this is your answer. So it should go CBA. Okay? So hopefully you get that. So those definitions are important. You want to keep those straight in your mind. So one of the last sets of terms I just want you to understand, you'll see them, you should understand, are different other additional crime categories. So one of the things are what we call inchoate. Some people say inchoate crimes. These are what we call incomplete crimes. They are not crimes in and of themselves. So if you attempt to murder somebody, you didn't murder them. You just started to, but you never finished. So you can't be charged with murder because you didn't finish the crime. So we then can charge you for trying to do it. These are what we call the inchoate or incomplete crimes. So attempt is when you start to do it, you just don't finish it. Solicitation is when you ask somebody else to commit a crime. So you pay them. Murder for hire, you pay somebody or ask them to commit the crime for you. And then conspiracy is 2 or more people working together to commit a crime. So solicitation, one person is asking the other person to do it, but they're not going to be part of it themselves. Like, I don't want to be there, yuck, that's gross, but I'm going to pay you to do it. Where conspiracy, they're all working together to commit the crime. And then we have treason and espionage. So treason is the only crime actually identified in the Constitution. So treason is a crime that's identified in the Constitution. And then espionage is spying on our government or selling secrets to a foreign government. So those are sort of additional categories of crime that exist. Okay? So I want you to use everything that you learned so far, and I want you to classify these laws. So I want you to read through these 4 things. And what you need to do is first decide, is it state likely or is it federal? Is it criminal or civil? Is it substantive or procedural? So for each of these 4, you're going to have 3 words, either state or federal, civil or criminal, or substantive or procedural. So just to make one up, like if I was reading one, I would say, oh, it is state, criminal, procedural law. So you got to go back, make sure you understand the distinctions between them, and work through these 4. So take some time, stop the video, really think about this. You're going to have to understand this. So take the time to try to practice it on your own. Stop the video, and then when you're ready, you can start it, and I will go over the answers. Okay, so the first one, unlawfully killing a human with malice aforethought. This is murder, right? So remember, we said most crimes are always going to be state. Then is it civil or criminal? It's criminal. And it's substantive because everybody in the world has to follow this law. The next one, right against unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant. This is right from our Constitution. It's the U.S. Constitution. So we know it's federal. We know warrants only are involved with criminal cases. You don't have warrants except for crimes, and searches and seizures without crimes. So we know it's federal, criminal, and this is procedural. It's a procedure that has to be followed by people that work in the system. The next one, a New York requirement that all lawsuits for personal injuries arising from negligence be filed within 3 years of the accident. So it tells you, I know New York requirements. We know it's state, New York. And then we know that it is civil because we're talking about personal injuries and negligence. And we're saying when they have to file the paperwork. So that's procedural because it's people in the system. So it's state, civil, procedural. And then the last one, illegal to share pornographic photos of minors on the internet, punishable by 5 years. So as soon as we see the internet word, we know it's probably federal because it's crossing state lines. We know it's criminal because it's actual crime with a punishment. And we know it's substantive because everybody has to follow this law. So hopefully you understood that. I have one more review for you. So you can read through this, fill in the blanks, and start the video. And then when you're ready, you can start the video and see if you got it right. So hopefully you got your sources right, reviewed too. So there are a bunch of assessments online that you can take. If you're unsure of this, you can practice with and you can take them. So make sure you spend some time looking at that. And if you have any questions, please contact me. So it says go to Genesis. That's what we used to call my GCC. So it's my GCC. If you have any questions, please reach out and I will be happy to answer them. So that is the first video for chapter 3. And remember, there'll be 2 more that you have to watch. We have to talk about elements and we have to talk about criminal defenses. Okay? Well, thank you for listening and I will talk to you soon. See ya.